Christmas dinner had just begun when my grandfather suddenly slammed his hand down on the table. The dry, sharp sound echoed through the otherwise warm room. "Explain to me," he said slowly, "why a complete stranger is in control of the multi-million-dollar logistics company that I set up for my granddaughter." The piece of turkey on my plate froze in midair. That question struck like lightning, bringing the entire room to a standstill. Just seconds before, there had been laughter, clinking glasses, the aroma of roast turkey and cinnamon wafting through the dining room. Now no one moved. My grandfather, Raymond, who had just returned from a long business trip, was seated at the head of the table, a position no one dared challenge. He slammed his hand down on the wooden table again, harder than before. The glasses clinked. His gaze was fixed on a single point across from him, his voice low but sharp. "The cold storage and logistics company in Colorado that I transferred to Lila 4 years ago, why is it now run by someone else?" I slowly set my fork down. My heart pounded, but I tried to keep my voice normal. "Dad, what are you talking about? You've never had a single dollar in your name. How could you own a company?" The silence that followed was suffocatingly heavy. I saw my father's hand grip the meat knife so tightly it turned white. My mother's face turned pale, staring at her napkin. My younger brother and his wife exchanged a quick glance. Too quick. No one spoke. My maternal grandfather leaned forward, his voice now calmer. "A few weeks ago, an old business partner called me by mistake. He thought I was still involved with the company." He paused for a moment, then continued. "He congratulated me on the new owner taking over the entire operation. The name he mentioned was Mark Holden." I repeated the name softly, almost whispering. "Mark Holden? I've never heard of him." Inside me, everything was a jumble, but I said nothing more. I just silently observed each face around the table. The atmosphere was so tense that one wrong word would shatter it. And just then, the doorbell rang. My grandfather didn't turn around. He simply said, "They're here." Have you ever been betrayed by people you believe to be family? If you have, please share your story. I'm reading every line. Come back. 2 officers entered the dining room. The whole family sat motionless, as if no one had yet caught their breath after the question. My grandfather reached into the leather briefcase beside the chair. He pulled out a thick stack of files, neatly folded, their edges bearing the marks of time. They were tax documents and business reports that an old business partner had mistakenly emailed him. He set them down on the table. Then he pointed directly at a line circled in red. The name Mark Holden, the principal owner of the cold storage and logistics company. My younger brother Ethan immediately leaned forward. His face flushed as he quickly flipped through the pages, as if the faster he read, the more the truth would disappear. He shook his head, his voice louder and more urgent than usual. "There must be some mistake," he said. "Maybe it's a company with the same name in another area." The explanation sounded so familiar, it was almost as if it had been prepared. My stepmother hurriedly placed her hand on my grandfather's arm. Her voice was excessively soft. She said he must be tired after the long flight, that jet lag sometimes distorts people's memories. She smiled, a smile so bright it was out of place, and tried to steer the conversation in a different direction. My father nodded in agreement, cutting another slice of turkey as he spoke. He said it was Christmas. It was a time for family, for celebration. Business matters could wait. I sat still, letting everything unfold before my eyes. I maintained a poker face as if this were the first time I'd heard it all. Inside, my head was spinning. But outside, I was strangely calm. When I spoke, my voice was soft and slow. I recounted how the past 4 years hadn't been easy. After graduating, I lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. Thin walls. The old air conditioner barely worked during the sweltering summer days. For months on end, my meals consisted only of instant noodles and a few cheap vegetables bought at the discount store. I remember one particular Christmas. I had just received my wages from a temporary job. After paying rent and bills, the only thing I could afford was a box of unbranded cookies. I wrapped it in old newspaper because I didn't have any wrapping paper. I looked around the dining table as I told this. Then I asked very softly why no one had ever told me about this company, if it really was in my name. My voice trembled slightly, just enough to reveal my pain and surprise. my grandfather continued, recalling the wrong number call from a former colleague. He said the man believed he was still overseeing operations and even praised Mark Holden for expanding the warehouse, upgrading the refrigeration equipment, and securing more refrigerated shipping contracts across the region. Ethan shifted in his chair. His wife mumbled something about how emails and calls in business are often misinterpreted. She sat silently longer than usual, carefully turning the food on her plate. My mother kept glancing around the table. My father cleared his throat, suggesting everyone have dessert to ease the tension. He asked my grandfather if the partner had said anything else specific. My grandfather continued with technical details about the new shipping routes that were significantly increasing profits. Each word that fell onto the table felt like another heavy weight. The Christmas tree lights suddenly became dazzling, as if mocking the growing tension. My father tried to change the subject, talking about the aroma of the cake, but his words went unheard. Ethan avoided eye contact with everyone. He just stared at the pile of papers, as if they would disappear if he looked long enough. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she poured more water into the untouched glasses. I leaned back, crossing my arms over my chest. Not defensively, but to keep myself from trembling. The denials began to pile up. Vague, incomplete excuses, overlapping each other. Grandfather didn't pressure anyone. He just left the papers there as a truth no one could completely deny. The room grew thick with tension. Everyone waited for someone to break the deadlock. Plates clinked against plates, but no one actually ate. I could clearly sense that they were trying to find some way to alleviate the growing discomfort. Each moment of silence seemed deliberately held back. My maternal grandfather didn't drop the topic, though he didn't raise his voice. My father let out a long sigh, the kind he usually used when trying to sound reasonable in difficult arguments. He set the meat knife down beside the plate, the metal scraping against the porcelain with a soft but sharp sound. He glanced around the table, his eyes a mixture of anxiety and cultivated patience. Then he began to tell the story in his own words. 4 years ago, right after I graduated, my maternal grandfather had taken charge of the entire cold storage and transportation system, a ready-to-operate business with warehouses scattered around the area and long-term contracts, all built in my name as a gift for the future. But according to my father, I was too young then, fresh out of school, without practical experience. Running such a large system, he said, could overwhelm me, and one wrong decision could cost me everything. He explained that the family had only agreed to handle the day-to-day operations, only temporarily, just for protection. My mother chimed in immediately afterward. Her voice was familiar, gentle, yet firm. She said they feared unscrupulous partners might take advantage of my inexperience, or hasty choices would put the company at serious financial risk. All of this, she said, was to protect my grandfather's investment for my long-term benefit. My younger brother, Ethan, nodded repeatedly from across the table. He called it a collective family decision, a necessary protection. No one wanted to see me shoulder such immense responsibility so soon. His wife sat silently beside him, handing him a plate, her eyes averted to avoid the increasingly tense atmosphere. I let the pain show on my face long enough, as if this were the first time I'd realized the betrayal. Then I leaned forward and asked, my voice choked just enough, "So what exactly is temporary management? What decisions did they make without me? And if the purpose was protection, why was I completely excluded?" My father reassured me that it was just routine supervision, maintaining contracts, paying suppliers, reinvesting profits. Nothing is permanent, he emphasized. Control would be returned whenever I felt capable enough. My mother added that they deliberately kept me out of the picture to avoid adding further pressure during a period when I was learning to live independently. Ethan interjected, saying they were closely monitoring performance, ensuring steady growth without unnecessary adjustments. My grandfather calmly interrupted. He shook his head, then pointed to the file on the table. "These papers," he said, "show no provisional guardianship or fiduciary duty. They state full transfer of ownership." My father's brow furrowed. He suggested that there might have been management updates for tax purposes, technical adjustments that didn't alter the family's actual control. My mother agreed. I gently inquired about the legal structure. that sometimes companies have to adjust their form for responsibilities and obligations. Could those changes inadvertently cause someone else's name to appear as the principal owner? My voice carried enough confusion and pain to be persuasive. Ethan immediately dismissed it, claiming it was merely an administrative error by the government, a common mistake when multiple family members are involved. His wife stirred slightly, twisting the napkin in her hand, but remained silent. My mother evaded the question, insisting they were closely monitoring everything and would soon be fully transparent. My father nodded, suggesting the discussion be postponed until after the holidays, when everyone was less tense. My maternal grandfather responded with a single, concise statement. Official records show this was a direct transfer. The light reflected the sweat on my father's temples. My mother's reassuring smile faltered. Ethan rubbed his neck, as if he'd just felt a sharp pain there. The excuses continued to pile up, misunderstandings, protective measures, all avoiding a single truth. A transaction had taken place. I watched silently. Every glance avoided eye contact. Every voice rose defensively. The festive atmosphere vanished completely, leaving only an awkward politeness masking a growing unease. Essentially, the conversation hadn't changed. Everyone spoke defensively, more fragile than before, but also more stubborn. No one was willing to back down. They all clung to vague assurances of temporary status and some kind of future transfer. The Christmas tree lights continued to flicker, casting patches of color on tense faces. The denial remained intact, but its edges had begun to fray under the scrutinizing gaze. My grandfather had just brought up the transfer of ownership again. Then he looked directly at Ethan, his eyes heavy with unspoken questions. I was the one to speak. I asked my younger brother directly if he had signed any company-related paperwork in the past few years. Ethan blinked repeatedly, placing his glass down on the table more forcefully than necessary. Finally, it admitted to signing a few limited power of attorney documents when its parents requested them. According to it, these were just necessary papers to handle day-to-day decisions, while I was still getting used to everything. My grandfather was silent for a moment. Then he reached for the phone. A short call. A single instruction. Come in immediately. The door opened shortly after. My grandfather's lawyer walked in confidently, carrying his familiar briefcase. He set it down on the table, unlocked it, revealing stacks of files arranged so neatly they were chilling. He began with the core document, an old power of attorney form, bearing a signature that looked very much like mine. The lawyer pointed to the date first. He noted the suspicious coincidence. The exact time the file moved showed I was in another city for an interview, hours' drive away. Next came the magnified images, the strokes, the pen angles, subtle but distinct from verified signature samples, lighter pressure in some strokes, inconsistent slant in others. Not enough to outright declare it a forgery, but more than enough to raise serious questions. Then came the printer trace analysis. Almost invisible yellow dots, a characteristic feature of most office printers. The results showed the document was printed from a device that appeared months later than the date recorded on the paper. The timeline began to crack. My father reacted immediately, saying that backup copies often have new print dates for record-keeping purposes. My mother agreed, adding that reprinting after the initial submission is very common. Ethan shifted the conversation to the notary service, arguing that staff frequently have to reprint lost originals, especially during periods of high demand. His wife finally spoke up, suggesting that delays in administrative oversight at government agencies sometimes lead to unintentional adjustments to metadata. I maintained my bewildered expression. Then I asked, as if merely trying to understand, if so, what do those technical details say about actual control over the warehouse and the contracts? That question led to more lengthy explanations. The more we talked, the more loopholes emerged. My maternal grandfather occasionally interjected, pressing for specific details about the scope of the authorizations. The lawyer clarified, the law only permits authorization within the stated scope. Exceeding it could lead to scrutiny. The responses piled up, more defensive. My father insisted that the intention was always to protect. My mother said they just wanted to avoid adding further burden to my early career. Ethan repeated that the forms were only for ensuring continuity of operation, not for transferring permanent ownership. His wife nodded, saying such agreements provided more comprehensive protection for family assets. I nodded in agreement. Then I asked very softly, if the oversight is only temporary, why are such authorizations necessary? The question forced them to hastily cite the effectiveness during periods of rapid growth. The lawyer continued, this time comparing it side by side with bank signature cards from accounts in my name. The differences were still there. The fundamental discrepancies, breaks rarely seen in my genuine signature. No one mentioned the word forgery, but no one could say that everything was all right. The festive atmosphere had completely vanished. All that remains are polite words, layered upon one another, concealing a truth that is increasingly becoming apparent. I continued to ask questions, not to accuse, but to better understand the bigger picture, the difficult circumstances, the pressures that led to those decisions. Though my trust had waned, I quietly took note of everything. I asked why the rejection so suspiciously coincided with crucial milestones in my career. The answers came quickly, hasty, full of justification. The more I spoke, the more confused things became. Tensions tightened. Family alliances began to visibly crack under the weight of mutual exposure. Grandfather remained the observer. He let the silent evidence tell its story, a deliberate, prolonged intervention. The voices around the table grew quieter, not out of agreement, but out of exhaustion. The defenses remained. Resentment was unresolved. No one truly admitted to having crossed the line. All the focus now revolved around the extent of career damage. Who did more? Who did less? The divisions became undeniable. Permanent rifts lay deep beneath the outward attempts at reconciliation. Then my grandfather held out his hand, requesting silence. The argument stopped immediately. Everyone turned to look at him. In his eyes was a cold determination, something I rarely saw, even when he spoke of the harsh negotiations of his youth. He took a deep breath before speaking. His voice was even, devoid of any warmth. He said that a few months earlier, when the first irregularities appeared, he had consulted an expert, and he had updated his will. The new text revoked all previous provisions that benefited my parents, my younger brother, and his wife. All remaining assets, real estate, investments, trusts, were transferred solely to me as the heir. The lawyer quietly confirmed. He slid the certified copy across the table. The witness's seal and signature gleamed in the dining room lights. Not stopping there, he moved on to the conclusive evidence. Forensic comparisons lay side by side, signatures on the contract transferring the cold storage company to an outside buyer. The overlays matched chillingly. The curvature of the letters, the point of pen lift, the distribution of force. Ethan's signature matched with near-perfect accuracy. Next came the financial records. Large transfers traced directly from the buyer into a long-standing joint account, controlled by my parents, clearly classified as payments for the sale of business assets. Ethan's resistance crumbled. His shoulders slumped. Finally, he admitted the whole plan, a rigged sale to raise emergency funds to save his father's construction company from foreclosure. He spoke of the cash shortage, of the stringent requirements from the bank, of the fear of losing everything. His wife's role was also revealed. She had leveraged her industry connections to find a discreet buyer, willing to complete the transaction quickly without asking too many questions. My mother put her hand to her mouth, choking back a sob. My father stood speechless. Ethan's wife clung to the edge of the table, her knuckles white, tears streaming down her face as she uttered broken protests. My grandfather responded, his voice low. He stated clearly, the coordinated deception, spanning years, had deprived me of my autonomy, exploiting a gift intended solely for my safety. The lawyer continued, presenting the relevant legal provisions. The falsification of documents affecting property rights could lead to severe penalties, plus the possibility of prosecution for financial fraud for transferring money based on false information. A knock sounded, a firm knock. My grandfather nodded. 2 officers entered, professional in their manner and clear in their voices. They explained that a complaint alleging document fraud had been filed earlier, accompanied by preliminary evidence from an expert. One officer photographed the evidence. The other delivered the summons. Ethan received it first, then my father. The documents required immediate appearance to assist in an investigation concerning an alleged forged signature and the illegal disposal of assets. Ethan's wife collapsed, sobbing, pleading that it was just a misunderstanding that could be resolved within the family. My mother slumped into a chair, burying her face in her hands. My father mechanically accepted the documents, his eyes vacant. Ethan stared at the summons, muttering disjointed apologies about despair, about wrong choices. I waited until the officers finished their formalities. Then I spoke. My voice was calm. No more pretense. I said they had chosen to protect their way of life, rather than the future I had entrusted to them. They had liquidated things that never belonged to them. And from this point on, the consequences were inevitable. No intervention, no leniency on my part. The officers took note, left their contact information, and departed. The room fell into a heavy silence. The music from the speaker in the corner of the room continued to play steadily, but it sounded cruelly out of place. My mother trembled as she reached across the table, her pleas breaking into whispers, a longing for dialogue, for reconciliation, despite all the mistakes that had been made. My father wept. His cries were weak, as if he himself understood that the financial pressures had completely clouded his judgment. Lena continued to sob, repeatedly asking how something once called protecting the family had turned into irreparable harm. Evan remained silent, his head bowed. Failure was evident in every breath. My maternal grandfather neatly gathered the scattered papers on the table. His lawyer carefully put the documents away in his briefcase, concluding briefly and cautiously. I repeated once more. Those decisions had been made years ago, and compassion, if any, demands a level of remorse deep enough to confront irreversible damage. No one spoke another word. The evening dissolved in a broken silence. Relationships crumbled in ways that were irreversible. The officers departed. The cold winter night in the American South felt like a final summons. Files were left on the desk, like announcements needing no explanation. A year passed in the harsh workings of the legal system, a year that tested every ounce of resilience I had ever built. The civil lawsuit dragged on through testimony, evidence gathering, and numerous hearings in the central court of the port city. I sat for hours under the fluorescent lights, repeating the timelines I knew by heart. Sleepless nights followed as I reviewed the affidavits and expert reports, wondering if the forensic evidence was strong enough to stand up against arguments of good faith or administrative error. The outside buyer's lawyer argued that he had transacted in reasonable belief in legitimate ownership. That reduced the likelihood of recovery to partial compensation, rather than the full value of the business. The final compensation was enough to lay the groundwork, but never enough to recover the years, opportunities, and growth that had been stolen. The judgment was enforced. Payments were made in installments, under close supervision to prevent any attempts at evasion. The old family world crumbled. My father's construction company collapsed under the weight of debt and legal costs, forcing complete liquidation. Decades of contracts, assets, and reputation were wiped out. My parents sold their suburban home, a place steeped in my childhood memories, to cover their remaining obligations. They moved to a small rented apartment devoid of holiday decorations, with no trace of the past. Evan faced his own consequences from the fraud investigation, probation, compensation, persistent financial pressure. Lena filed for divorce midway, citing irreconcilable differences stemming from this very consequence. She returned to her hometown, trying to escape the scandal that had destroyed her professional network. As for me, I invested all of my compensation into a smaller logistics project, a cold storage system serving local farmers, wholesale markets, and independent food stores around the coast. The first few months were extremely tough. I made relentless sales calls, rented booths at trade fairs, and offered discounts to build trust. Capital was limited, just enough to cover warehouse rent, trailer purchases, and delayed employee salaries, testing the loyalty of those I hired. Cash flow gradually stabilized thanks to persistence and on-time service. Customers returned. They referred other partners. Inventory turnover improved month by month. My maternal grandfather moved to a nearby apartment. He offered informal advice, learned from decades of negotiating with suppliers. His risk assessments were measured but effective. He occasionally visited the construction site, his pride evident as operations expanded from a small facility to satellite locations around the area. All contact with my parents and brothers ceased completely. The phone number was blocked. Apologies sent through mutual acquaintances. I deleted them without reading. Healing requires boundaries. Don't reopen old wounds. Career milestones came in silence. The first profitable business quarter, employee retention bonuses, positive customer feedback, things that larger competitors couldn't personalize. Life settled into a routine. Morning inventory check, evening paperwork, weekends spent reading industry journals or walking on quiet trails. Grandpa's presence brought stability, shared meals, gentle conversations, peaceful evenings. Financial independence was no longer a concept. It was proof. The shadow of betrayal occasionally loomed large in moments of doubt, but the momentum had overcome it. Licenses renewed, insurance updated, vehicles acquired, the local community reconnected through trade associations and sustainable agriculture programs. I wasn't rebuilding my old life. I was building a different life, a life that was truly my own. My grandfather's health remained excellent. His profound insights continued to help me refine my business strategy amidst volatile fuel prices and frequent supply chain disruptions. He always viewed these changes as a problem requiring patience, not a threat. The isolation from close family gradually ceased to be a loss. It became the peace of a solitary but chosen life, rooted in self-reliance. Memories of that Christmas Eve rarely returned. When they did, they were more like a reminder than a regret. The business continued to grow steadily. More cold storage facilities were put into operation. The number of operating units expanded. The driver team was diversified to reduce the risk of dependence on a single individual or route. Stability was built on a solid foundation, sufficient to withstand future uncertainties. My grandfather often remarked that resilience isn't shown through big decisions, but through the ability to maintain what's right over the long term. I could see the satisfaction in his eyes as he watched the business thrive under my leadership. Life had been reshaped around authenticity, no longer tainted by the toxins inherited from the past. From my small office, I began sharing my personal story anonymously on an online forum for those who had been financially exploited by relatives. Initially, the posts only attracted a few quiet views. Then sympathetic responses began to appear. Strangers facing inheritance disputes, sibling fraud, or silent family betrayal. One evening, after closing the warehouse, I received a private message from a young woman living in Oklahoma. She told me that her brother had secretly transferred ownership of the farmland her grandmother had left her, using forged documents, while she was working part-time to pursue nursing studies. We exchanged a few messages, then more. In the weeks that followed, I shared the resources I had gathered from my own case, names of legal aid organizations, how to file a complaint with the local office, tips on obtaining bank records without alerting the perpetrator. She updated me step by step, from the first consultation to filing a civil lawsuit, attending unsuccessful mediation sessions. I stayed up late to answer her questions, offering encouragement when her testimony wavered. Finally, the case concluded with a favorable verdict. Ownership was restored. Damages were compensated. She sent me a handwritten letter, simple but grateful pages, saying that the guidance had transformed her overwhelming fear into concrete action. Similar cases continued. A man in Colorado contacted me because his parents were diverting the distribution of their educational trust. A sister in Florida told me about her aunt quietly liquidating their joint investment account. I spent several hours on weekends advising online, reviewing securely uploaded documents, suggesting questions for their lawyers, explaining legal precedents, sometimes originating in Texas but affecting federal cases. No fees were exchanged. The satisfaction came from seeing panic gradually replaced by clarity, people regaining control of their lives. Grandpa Sidney became a regular visitor to the office. He dropped by mid-morning, bringing coffee from his usual cafe, and sat in the empty chair while I processed bills or planned routes. Our conversations gradually shifted to justice. He acknowledged that the road ahead was always more bumpy than the initial outrage. Procedures dragged on, hearings were postponed, and the fact that recovery didn't mean things would go back to how they were. But he also recognized my maturity. Hashtag the way I handled difficulties. Hashtag the way I made decisions based on experience, not on impulse. Christmas now held a completely different meaning. The decorations were minimal. A small tree at the reception desk, a few strings of lights along the warehouse entrance, to thank the staff. This day no longer evokes forced gatherings or ulterior motives. It has become an annual reminder to prioritize what matters most: self-preservation. I see my family with clearer eyes. The bond is now built on consistency. Respect is no longer taken for granted simply because of blood ties. Forgiveness can exist, but only when accompanied by genuine change, not repeated hurt. The pain of betrayal has gradually subsided over time. It has been replaced by purpose, helping others overcome similar circumstances. And each success story, however small, reinforces the path I have chosen. The choice to end toxic relationships created the necessary space for healthier connections to form. New relationships were built not on obligation, but on mutual trust. My grandfather often reminded me that it was the harshest trials that forged resilience, something I never thought I could achieve. The satisfaction came quietly from watching the business continue to thrive on an honest path, completely detached from the shadows of the past. The lesson learned was clear. Family ties don't automatically come with loyalty. True protection begins from within, and boundaries aren't cruel. They are necessary conditions for survival, for growth, and for avoiding repeatable hurt. Cutting off contact wasn't meant to punish anyone. It created space for survival and for the ability to contribute beyond personal pain. Life continued to move forward, guided by choices aligned with tested values. Peace came not from forced reconciliation, but from accepting reality and committing to different, higher, clearer standards. Helping others gradually became a form of silent atonement, not to erase the past, but to transform it into shared strength. Grandfather's presence remained a stable anchor in daily life. His wisdom was not imposing, but always present at the right time. The business continued to expand in a controlled manner, adding cold storage, expanding delivery routes along the central Texas corridors. Community engagement came naturally, sponsoring food donation campaigns, partnering with small farms to maintain a reliable cold chain supply. Personal fulfillment doesn't come from scale, but from achieved independence and a clear purpose, supporting vulnerable individuals facing betrayal within their own families. Reflection brings clarity. Blood ties guarantee nothing. It is character that defines worthiness. Forgiveness is not for unrepentant traitors. Refusing to grant it is a way to protect future happiness. Moving forward means embracing self-reliance, helping others, and living authentically, but selectively. That journey wasn't easy. It brought pain, but also opened up growth and direction I never anticipated. My grandfather once summed it all up in a quiet coffee meeting. Justice is sometimes incomplete, but personal evolution is the complete victory. That perspective has shaped everything, from business decisions to community-oriented endeavors to the way I live each day. Christmas is no longer a symbol of loss. It marks renewal, a day to strengthen mindfulness and gratitude for the path chosen. The core truth is kept secret yet clear. Families are only worthy of their place when they respect boundaries. The absence of negativity allows for sincerity. And from there, life is rebuilt, on solid foundations, continuing forward with quiet but enduring confidence. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe to the channel to continue following my journey. Thank you for watching.